G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle, and today I want to be talking about the Mechanicum in 30k and the way they've been treated in the 28mm Age of Darkness game system. And the first thing I want to talk about is, well, actually, first thing I should mention is I've had 3 cracks at this so far that have failed for different reasons. The first one failed 2 seconds in because the minute I move the mouse, I accidentally scrolled over one of the menus in this website and it fills the entire bloody screen. And it's actually kind of hard to navigate off the menu sometimes. But that's just operator error combined with a not so great website. The second time I failed because I got onto a tangent about Legions Imperialis and the future of that game system, which, well, I've sort of spoken about already before, so I didn't want to cover that same old ground. No, what I want to actually talk about is the fact that we've got all of these Dark Mechanicum miniatures that have been shown to us through these different trailers, articles, I don't know what you want to call them, but it needs to be spoken about. And, well, where do I begin with that? Well, let's begin with the positives. The positives are, I think every one of these is gorgeous. The only design I'm a bit iffy on is the Tenebrax Archer. And that's the one you can see sort of middle top of the screen. Because it has all those, I guess, eyes, we'll call them. They could be rockets, I'm not sure. But all those holes in that carapace on the front. And it looks wrong to me. It doesn't work. I think it would look much better with just a smooth carapace. I think they just did it so it was visually more distinct from, you know, the Butcher type, for example. But, you know, it's fine. But apart from that, it's the only design I think is a bit iffy out of them. I really like this one here. Definitely got some actual good Dark Mechanicum vibes. And you can really see in this design in particular, the scale. That is not a 8mm Legions Imperialis scaled miniature. For a start, there's a whole bunch of micro detailing on it that you don't really get on the Imperialis scaled one. But more importantly, it's the little things. And by the little things, I mean the little cables on it. You see, all of the cables on Legions Imperialis stuff are kind of chonky, and they have to be, because if you proportion them the same way you do the 28mm scale cables, they'll be far too small and brittle and, well, actually they'd be very hard to mold in the first place. And the fact that this has all of that detail, as well as the way that the weapons are scaled and proportioned and the trim and the depth of the trim, all of that screams to be 28mm scaling. And if you look at this particular miniature, and especially take note of the leg cables and such, when I scroll down to it here, look at the size of the leg cables in proportion to the legs themselves, and you get a very good idea of how much detailing there is. Look at the iris on it, right? The giant central eyeball on the thing. On the picture that we have above, it's covered in tiny little rivets and micro details, and has many, many teeth. This one only has like 6 iris teeth in the middle of it, and doesn't have any of those little rivets really micro detailing around it, but this one does. It has many, many teeth. So that's a 28mm scale release. So apart from these looking amazing, to me personally, my personal tastes, these are what I imagine's pretty similar to what I imagine really for Dark Mechanicum units to look like. So full points to them there. I think they did a brilliant job in the sculpting phase, and these look great to me. But my confusion sets in when I look at all of these and all the images that we have of them, and then I think about the implementation of them. Because yes, they're lovely looking miniatures, but why have they been released in this game system? Because the Dark Mechanicum, if they need to be released at all, should not have been a sideshow for a side system. It should have been a big selling point of Horus Heresy in 28mm. And the only reason I can think that they didn't, well, actually, there's 2 reasons. The first one is, and without going into the rant that I deleted before I re-recorded, is because I think they're just they've already made the molds and they're just trying to get them out and get all the stuff out that they've already designed and molded for Legions Imperialis before they stop supporting it in a year or two's time. That's one thing. They want to return on that investment, right? But the other thing is, they don't want to give us too much too fast for the mainline game systems. And this is an interesting strategy, and quick history lesson here. If we go back to the 90s and the early 2000s, I was there, Gandalf, 3,000 years ago, because I'm apparently an old man now. When you went back to that time period, when an army got an update, it didn't necessarily get everything all at once. But it did show you everything they had in mind for it all at once. So I think a really good example of this is if you look at the Chaos Warriors for Warhammer Fantasy Battles, their 7th edition Warhammer Fantasy release. I know that's a lot of name to pack into one comment there, but we're talking around the 2002, 2003 era that happened. And in that release, they showed you straight out in that army book, in the White Dwarf articles, a lot of units that you would not actually be able to purchase for several months. But they were there, you knew they were coming, and you knew what the release roughly would be, because it was every, 2 months, 3 months, they did a different Chaos God. And when that happened, bam, here's the Bloodletters, here's the Fleshhounds, here's the new Bloodthirster, right, here's your Khorne Lord in white metal. Alright, couple months go by, here's the Nurgle release. Couple months go by, here's the Slaanesh release. Couple months go by, strangely enough, there was the Tzeentch release. Cool, totally on board with that. And that was how my Warhammer experience was from the 90s through the 2000s. But since Kevin Roundtree's taken over, I've noticed that things are very different. Okay, something is rotten in the state of Nottingham. And in this instance, what happens is we get undercooked releases, heavily undercooked releases. It's like the company wants to give us the absolute bare minimum they think they can get away with. And to an extent, that's tolerable. But to a greater degree, the problem is that very much suits the company and the company's agenda. But here at the Outer Circle, I'm all about the person who's actually playing the game, the consumer, right? The customer. And how the customer is treated by the company. And my problem with this is that, well, I don't care what, Kevin Roundtree and the suits want. What I care is what's best for the health of the game system, the longevity of the hobby, and obviously the people that I'm playing with, and I myself am selfish in this because I'm a participant who is purchasing miniatures, correct? And when I look at it, I'm like, well, why are you undercooking these releases? Oh, because you want to draw out the releases over several years so you've got something to sell every year. That's great for the company, for those financial reports, but it's not great for the customer. And some examples of this that I've used in the past, and therefore I will use again shamelessly. Think the Sisters of Battle. They get a codex, they get a bunch of units, in COVID, mind you. They don't really get to use those units, new edition rolls around, and then a few months into that new edition, suddenly they get another codex, and now the rest of the army. Look at the Khorne Berserkers, and in the Chaos Space Marines range for Warhammer 40k. People were asking for an upgrade for them for a long time because their plastic miniatures dated back to 1998-ish, 99 at the newest. They finally get an update, but it's basically 4 units. What the hell? And one of those units is crappy cultists, and no one likes cultists. And cultist guy, stay out of the comments. Do not comment, do not fact check that statement. Alright. And you're left wondering, where the hell is the rest of the release, right? This feels undercooked, and you just know, deep in your soul, in your heart of hearts, in my cold, black, cynical heart, that there is another Khorne Berserkers Codex coming sometime this edition, which will have a few more units, another 3 or 4 units, to really justify the purchase, and it will actually fill out that army list, so it actually feels like a full army list this time. Instead of the weird 8-fold possess. What an awful idea. Sidetracked. Right? Another example of this, the Lumineth Realm Lords for Age of Sigmar. They had a release. Then there was a time span. And then all of a sudden the Lumineth had a second release, which again doubled the range roughly. We also saw a bit of this with the Caradon, not the Caradon Overlords. What's the squats called in current 40k? Bullshittius Copyrightus, I believe it is in Latin. And that particular range also had this. They were more fleshed out than most. You know, it was an actual release, yes. But they've had a lot of stuff come along since the initial release wave. Stuff that was not advertised, was not in their codex, and was therefore not predictable that it was going to come. Then that brings us to the Horus Heresy. Okay, so again, I'm providing some history here, some context, so forgive me if I draw this analogy out, or draw this example out. So when we got the Horus Heresy release, and we get the Legiones Astartes, we're missing melee weapons, we're missing despoilers, we're missing assault marines, we're missing breaches, recon, right, veterans, all sorts of stuff. And we get a glut of tanks for a long time, and we've got a whole bunch of scale issues as well, which nobody likes scale issues, you know, and that's why companies like Tortuga have taken off, because they're offering, you know, sized appropriate, I guess, miniatures, because some of those amazing early Heresy sculpts they're dated on the scale front, unfortunately. They don't look right. If you take, say, Palatine Blades or Rampages from Book 1, you know, they're 12, 13-year-old miniatures, and they're a lot smaller than the contemporaries in plastic. And people are going, what's going to go to plastic? What's going to stay in resin? And they ask themselves this question because nobody wants to commit to the purchase of resin. For many people, resin is more problematic to work with than plastics. I've got my own opinions on that. I think they're sort of pretty equal personally, but that's personal and professional taste. When it comes to the Mechanicum range, we're going through that right now because yes, you've got Castellax, yes, you've got Thalax, yes, you've got Thralls, yes, you've got the Thanatar and the Triaros, but what about Arlatax, Domitar, Vorax, Ursarax, Myrmidon Destructors, Myrmidon Secutors, Silax, Arlatax, if I didn't say that one already, Ursarax, like what is going on there, right, with all those different options? Well, we've seen them previewed in Legions Imperialis, so we know that there is a design for them, okay, in plastics. If it's a digital design for them in one scale, chances are there's a digital design for them in another scale. And yet we've just had their release for 30k, and rather than give it all to us at once, they're dragging it out over a protracted period of time. Because, hey, great for Games Workshop because they can drip feed this shit for years, but it's fucking shit for the consumer. Because the person who actually has to play these armies is now going, I want a Mechanicum army, but 3/4 of the shit is resin that I don't want to buy, and I know that it's going to be plastic at some point. Well, fuck it, I'm not going to buy anything. That's how most people work, okay? There'll be people out there right now who have a bunch of tech thralls right now because they, you know, bought, because of hype and FOMO, they went out and they bought some Mechanicum sets and they're sitting there scratching their heads right fucking now because they're going, geez, kind of need some Krios. I kind of need a Thanatar Calyx. I could really use some Arlatax and some Domitar. Oh, I need Myrmidons for sure. And then they look on the website and they see all that resin and the price and they go, screw that. I think I'm just going to shelve this Mechanicum army idea. And then we end up with more people who are going, the Marines seem to be pretty filled out. I guess I'll just play Marines. And then people wonder why everyone thinks that the Horus Heresy is a Marine-only game. And it doesn't help that the Mechanicum in the Horus Heresy is kind of toothless. I can see the angry people in the comments right now. Oh, Mechanicum are the best, blah, blah, blah. Cool. Let me qualify that thought, though. They are toothless in regards to the fact that you have to very specifically build them in certain ways in order for them to function. This is not a huge problem for the Marines. The Marines are very versatile in 30k. The Mechanicum this edition, your options are a lot more limited than they were in previous editions. Take Vorax. Last edition, Vorax, Stone Cold Marine Killers, right? This edition, Vorax, they kind of work best as suicide operatives, where you blow them up, charge a unit and let them die, because when they blow up, they do strength 8 hits in an area around them because of the weird rules they've decided. All units blow up with the same strength radius because of reasons. And things like Terminators and such is a real problem, because for every one you roll, there is no feel, no pain, you just lose that Terminator. And that's kind of a big deal when Terminators are multi-wound this edition. But the Voraks themselves can't hit Terminators that hard. So the Voraks actually work better dying to Terminators than they do attacking the Terminators. And they're not so great at attacking power armor either this edition. Mechanicum in general, a lot of weapon skill 3 stuff. 1 point lower than Marines. And the thing is, weapon skill is huge this edition. If someone has 1 point higher than you in weapon skill, you're hitting them 30% of the time, they're hitting you 60% of the time. It's a huge difference. And for the Mechanicum, you don't have a lot of miniatures that hit hard. They don't have an awful lot of attacks comparatively, and not all of their attacks actually can breach power armor. So you end up in a horrible situation if you're a Mechanicum player, unless you heavily invest in certain avenues which really limits your playstyle. That is, unless you're just happy to take whatever and lose your games. Some people are happy with that approach. Personally, I think most people prefer to at least stand a fighting chance, not feel like their choice of army was the greatest limiting factor in their games. They want not perfect balance, but something that approaches some kind of balance, okay? And they do not have that this edition. And then we get this Mechanicum release teased to us. And they get a tease to us, and you may be wondering, because I had these other articles pulled up. You see, it was only at the end of August that they were telling us the Martian Civil War was coming, because it arrived at the start of September. And then the Dark Mechanicum, they arrived to us 1 month after that. And we know there's 28mm scale stuff in there, because I can see it. You can all see it. You can look at the detail and go, hey, that's different details to the other miniatures. Some of these parts are smaller and more refined, and there's a lot of more micro detailing. Yeah, that's clearly 28mm scale. And so you ask yourself, how come these weren't released in the Martian Civil War? Right? And that's a fantastic question. Maybe it's because the Martian Civil War was already the printers. Maybe it's because these are going to 28mm, to Imperialis only, or they're going to 40k in 28mm scale, not to 30k. Or it's because the company is, like with the Lumineth, like with the Sisters of Battle, like with the Khorne Berserkers, they're nickel and diming us. They're just taking the release and they're going to drag it out over a year or two. And I mean, look at the Marines. If you want to see dragged out releases, look at the 30k range. And this is not a case of me expecting every single unit all at once, okay? Like I said, it is fine to drag something out in some way, as I referred to in that Chaos Warriors example at the start of the video. But you knew what was coming into plastics or into production because it was all put into the army book. We also knew what the release schedule would be because we got an idea out of White Dwarf. They told us, all right, in 3 months expect this, in 3 months expect this, in 3 months expect this. And when they did it, they dropped each sub-faction as a whole every time they did that. It was only over a few months period that they did this, right? Maybe every second month, right? Cool. That is a fine way to do it. That is not what's happening with Horus Heresy. What's happening is we get a miniature released, and then we get a nebulous roadmap for some reason. Where is it? This roadmap that is just nebulous. It doesn't tell us anything. It doesn't tell us when certain things are happening. Like, oh, more tanks coming. Nobody cares about more fucking tanks, except for people who have zero control over their purchasing. Okay? People who are very, very, very susceptible to the marketing. All right? Those people care about the tanks. Sure. Some people just love tanks. Those people will also be into it. But the problem is the system is missing a lot of kind of crucial stuff. Like I said with the Mechanicum example before. You know, you need certain things to be coming into plastic, or to at least know when that's happening. There is nothing actually stopping the company from saying, you are going to get Myrmidon, Secutors, and Destructors in December. They could say that. I don't know that they are, by the way. That was just me picking a unit randomly. They could say that, and it would remove a lot of the uncertainty from things. Instead, what we're getting is silence. And that's the worst of both worlds. Because people, if people know it's coming, they won't purchase because they'll wait for it to drop. Right? And so the company thinks, maybe they'll just purchase if we don't tell them when it's coming. But the problem is people are smarter than that. They go, well, I know it's coming at some point. It might be this year, it might be next year. And so they shelve a project indefinitely, waiting for it to occur. So it's the worst of both worlds, because now they're getting zero play out of that army. All right? And all the hype and enthusiasm people have built up for a certain faction just drops off, the radar right then and there, unfortunately, which is a real shame. Okay? And with that Martian Civil War book, to really harp on the point here, because I don't think enough has been said about what a botched release it is, especially because I've done my miniature review on it, the purely objective, here's the raw numbers part. But what we had there was a book that should have been a multiple book huge deal, because you don't just have the Mechanicum, right? What you have in the Martian Civil War isn't just Mars itself, and it's not just the Dark Mechanicum versus the Imperial Loyalist Mechanicum. No, what you have is all the different sub-factions and different forge worlds of the Mechanicum that you can draw from. You can be inventive with any number of units, and because it's fluff and background and lore that has not really been explored, you can explore the different leaders of these households and introduce them as major special characters for that faction, because Mechanicum does not have many characters available to them, right? You could have Kelbor Hell, who should be even scarier than Anarchus Scoria. This should be a guy that gives the Mechanicum back some of that teeth on the tabletop that they're lacking. Someone who can go toe-to-toe with a Primarch, and you're not sure the Primarch is going to win, right? Because this is not just the head of the Mechanicum, it's the head of the Dark Mechanicum. He's channeling dark archaeotech, demon energies, who knows what, right? That's a really interesting character to play with, and you can even do two profiles for that character. A pre falling to the lures of Horus and Chaos, and a post falling to the lures of Horus and Chaos. What an awesome character the Fabricated General would be, Kelbor Hell, right? You could do the Loyalist Adeptus Mechanicus on Mars, and what they're up to. You could do different Forge worlds, like Paramar, for example. There is so much you can do with Mechanicum range. There are other factions that you can bring into the game. There are other units, like we talk about the Marines having sprawling units. The Mechanicum is just begging for more units in the Horus Heresy. And we see some of that in these awesome-looking demon engines. And yet none of it is introduced in the bloody book on the Mechanicum. Instead, what we got was a book that is 70% talking about the Space Marines. And the only new unit introduced for the Mechanicum in it, it's not even a new unit. It's an existing tank where they've given it one new weapon. Same tank. That is not a good release. That is not a good book by any objective measure of what we have come to expect from these books. It is not even telling us the campaign that we expected. The Martian Civil War should be all of those different sub-factions, because there are different households, like knight households, in the Mechanicum. People with their own vested interests and areas. And just think about all the cool things that they will be doing. They'll be going down into the tunnels and caverns underneath Mars and just pulling out all the strange archaeotech weapons they've got in their hidden vaults and just going, well, let's see what this does. There'd be black hole guns, all sorts of vortex weapons, right? There'd be interesting pulsars and sonic weapons. Hell, maybe even like Necron tech and Satan shards. Who the hell knows, right? But there is a lot of scope for what could be. And instead, all it translated to was a couple of warlord traits. Fundamentally, right? And warlord traits do not maketh the army. The Mechanicum has less variance between its sub-factions than the Marines do between any two legions. And that's not right, because the Mechanicum sub-factions and different Forge worlds are very, very different to one another. You see, all Marines originate from Terra, right? And they've only had, at most, 2 centuries to move away from Terran culture, where they've got new home planets and Primarchs and taken on the cultural traits and legacies of those people. And this blend of Terran and exoterran traits. The Forge worlds, many of them are from before the Long Night, right? Before the collapse of human civilization. So they are vastly different. I mean, look at the Thousand Suns aligned Forge world, okay? They are using psychic attuned automata, where instead of bolting servitors or human torsos and brains into their automata, they're plugging psychic crystals in there and using psychers to control these constructs. Make some rules for that, right? It's begging for it. You could have factions where they're using more xenotech, like the Black Shields are, right? Imagine a Mechanicum version of Black Shields. But more than just that, there are other factions at play here, okay? Some of them will have different STCs left over that they've not told the rest of the Mechanicum about, and they bust them out because they're in this huge, sprawling conflict all of a sudden. Explore that stuff. It's begging for it. It's screaming for it, this game system. And that's the kind of stuff I'm interested in, because imagine the hobbying opportunities that this opens up to us. Like, holy hell, I can have a Mechanicum faction where they're using Men of Iron. They pull a bunch of those out of some vault somewhere and throw Men of Iron constructs. Similar to like the Dark Angels Excendio automata, right? They could throw a bunch of that out and they're like, yeah, surprise, motherfucker, right? Cool, that's what I want to see. And instead, what we get is a lackluster 8mm scale Dark Mechanicum release, where you've got this awesome concept, these absolutely shit-hot miniatures, in my personal opinion, and they're just being relegated to one of the lamest game systems they have. And I mean that with all due love, Imperialis players. But you got to understand, you are very passionate about a niche product, right? If Horus Heresy is a niche product, what is the red-headed stepchild of Horus Heresy with only, to date, 3 factions, right? It's not the highest selling product. And it was, to be honest, executed out the back of Nottingham the minute that it hadn't even hit people's hands yet, and they'd already said Old World is coming a month from now. When they did that, that was the kiss of death to this system. I'm sorry. I know you love it, and you're putting in awesome effort, a lot of you, into your armies, and you're doing tons of cool stuff and cool work with it. By all means, keep it up. I do love the epic world, right? But let's be realistic here. If they were going to release these miniatures, if they're going to spend the time and effort making molds and packaging and designing it, for the love of God, why didn't they do it for 30k? Why didn't they do it in 28mm scale and use it to actually bolster the Mechanicum and deliver a decent-sized range all at once? So that Mechanicum players and people who are mech curious and 30 curious could actually pick up these armies and field a diverse range of units that can actually represent the Dark Mechanicum, not just the Loyalist Mechanicum, and can actually do it from day 0, instead of having a choice of essentially 5 or 6 units to build their army from in plastic, and then everything else is behind a resin paywall that's eternally out of stock. I feel really, really bad for Mechanicum players at what could have been. Anyway, that's it from me. Mac with the Circle. Please let me know your thoughts and feedback in the comments below. But again, try to be really rational about it, okay? Don't just come at me with things like, oh, well, you know, Games Workshop needs to make money, blah, blah. I don't care if they've got to make money. I don't. They're making plenty of money right now, but they're being very anti-consumer, okay? And that is my biggest concern here. So talk about that. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next video.